The water was already cresting the curb when I pulled up, turning the entrance to Northwood General's underground parking garage into a miniature, man-made Niagara Falls. Not the majestic, awe-inspiring kind, but the sad, grimy, urban runoff kind that smelled faintly of wet concrete and shattered dreams. A river of shimmering, murky water poured out onto the street, carrying with it a sad flotilla of debris. A styrofoam coffee cup, a single crock, a pamphlet on cardiac health. "I know, Mom, I see it," I said into my phone, my voice tight. "No, it's actually even worse than you described." My 2018 Ford F-150, usually a symbol of rugged competence, felt woefully inadequate. I wasn't here to haul lumber or tow a boat. I was here to fight a flood. A deliberate, man-made, Karen-fueled flood. "She's just standing there, Leo," my mom, Brenda, squawked through the phone's speaker. Her voice, normally a soothing balm of head nurse efficiency, was frayed to a wire. "She's standing on the lawn with a remote control, smiling, like she's just christened a new cruise ship instead of sinking the cars of half our surgical staff." My eyes scanned the scene of controlled chaos. 2 hospital security guards, looking profoundly defeated, were trying to unroll yellow caution tape that the gushing water immediately swept away. A handful of nurses and orderlies in colorful scrubs stood on the sidewalk, pointing and talking into their phones with frantic energy. And there, on a pristine patch of unnaturally green grass that separated the hospital property from the Evergreen Vistas condominium complex, was the source of all the misery. Carol. She stood with her arms crossed, a monument to petty tyranny, dressed in a blindingly white tennis skirt, a pastel pink polo shirt, and a visor that seemed to surgically attach to her severe blonde bob. She looked less like a person, and more like a sentient, weaponized homeowners association bylaw. In her hand, she held a small, gray remote control, which she occasionally aimed at the heavens like a Bond villain about to activate her doomsday laser. In this case, the laser was a series of rerouted, high-pressure sprinkler heads from the condo's ridiculously over-engineered irrigation system, all of them now aimed directly into the mouth of the hospital's parking garage. I killed the engine and swung out of the truck, the sheer idiotic audacity of it all washing over me. "Okay, Mom, I'm here. I'm going to talk to her." "Don't get arrested," she pleaded. "No promises," I muttered, and hung up. My name is Leo. On paper, I'm a freelance industrial logistics and solutions consultant. In reality, I'm the guy people call when things have gone so spectacularly wrong that normal solutions no longer apply. I've retrieved a priceless art sculpture from the bottom of a murky canal. I've re-engineered a grain silo that was dispensing wheat all over a small town, and I once convinced a flock of very angry ostriches to leave a film set using only a disco ball and a Barry White album. I am, for lack of a better term, a professional problem solver. And Carol, the HOA president from hell, had been a problem my family had been dealing with for the better part of a decade. This wasn't our first rodeo. There was the great mailbox color incident of Wait 22, where she tried to have my parents fined because their mailbox was a shade of beige inconsistent with the community's rustic aesthetic. There was the War of the Wind chimes, a month-long saga of passive-aggressive notes and formal complaints that ended only when my dad, a man of infinite patience, finally replaced the chimes with a motion-activated speaker that blasted a single deafening foghorn blast whenever she walked her poodle past their house. But this was a masterpiece, a magnum opus of malicious compliance. I strode across the wet asphalt, my boots squelching, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief, and a strange, burgeoning sense of professional admiration. You had to hand it to her. When she decided to be a menace, she didn't do it by halves. "Carol," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I reached the edge of her manicured turf. "What in the ever-loving heck do you think you're doing?" She turned to me, her lips pursed into a thin, triumphant line. Her eyes, small and hard, glittered with the unholy light of someone who is 100% certain of their own righteousness. "Leopold," she said, managing to make my name sound like a communicable disease. "I am simply enforcing the community bylaws, something your family has always had trouble comprehending." She held up a laminated sheet of paper, a shield of bureaucratic nonsense. Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph C. Resident parking spaces are for the exclusive use of Evergreen Vistas residents and their registered guests. The hospital has been warned repeatedly about their staff using our overflow lot. "So your solution is to flood a hospital?" I gestured wildly at the cascading water. "A deterrent? You're sinking the cars of on-call surgeons. Dr. Albright, the best cardiologist in the state, is supposed to be on call. His Lexus is currently becoming a submarine." "He should have thought of that before he parked in spot 7B, she sniffed, unmoved. "That spot is deeded to Mrs. Henderson in Unit 3A. He's been parking there for weeks. This is a direct consequence of his actions. Perhaps in the future he'll consider taking the bus. It's better for the environment, you know." I stared at her. My brain, usually a whirring machine of solutions and creative angles, just stopped. It was like trying to reason with a brick wall, if the brick wall was convinced it was upholding the very fabric of civilization. She genuinely believed her actions were not only justified, but necessary. In her mind, she wasn't a vindictive lunatic causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage and endangering public health. She was a hero, a lone warrior fighting for the sanctity of the parking spot. "Carol, you can't be this stupid," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her face hardened. "I will not be insulted. I am the duly elected president of this association, and I am acting within my rights to protect our property." She brandished the remote. "This irrigation system is the private property of the Evergreen Vistas HOA. Where we choose to aim it is our business." I ran a hand over my face, feeling the grit and grime of the city mix with the fine mist spraying from her artificial waterfall. Arguing was pointless. Logic had left the building. It was time for a different approach. Just then, the wail of a siren grew louder, and a police cruiser from the Northwood PD pulled up, lights flashing. Salvation, I thought. Or, more likely, the start of Act 2 of this bureaucratic farce. 2 officers climbed out of the cruiser. The first was a man in his late 50s, with a magnificent gray mustache and the weary, soul-crushed eyes of a man who had seen every possible flavor of human stupidity. His name tag read Miller. The second was a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, with a jawline so sharp it could cut glass and an expression of rigid, by-the-book intensity. His tag read Davis. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here?" Miller asked, his gaze sweeping from the waterfall to Carol, then to me. Davis, meanwhile, already had his notepad out. "Ma'am," he said, approaching Carol with the cautious energy of a bomb disposal expert. "We're getting reports of, well, this." Carol immediately shifted into her ultimate form, a condescending lecturer of law enforcement. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, officer," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "This individual," she flicked a dismissive hand at me, "is interfering with a legitimate community action." Officer Miller's mustache twitched. It was a facial event I would come to understand as his primary indicator of escalating disbelief. "A community action, ma'am? It looks like you're trying to flood the hospital." "We are providing a powerful disincentive for illegal parking," she corrected him, as if explaining a complex scientific principle to a child. "It's our water. It's our sprinkler system. We're on our property, As I was explaining to Leopold here before he started using foul language, we are perfectly within our rights. Davis, bless his rule-following heart, was trying to find a box to put this in. "Ma'am, is that a remote for the sprinkler system?" "It is," she said proudly. "And you are deliberately aiming the water into the garage?" "I am." "And you're refusing to turn it off?" "That is correct, officer. Not until the hospital administration agrees to sign a legally binding document with penalties for infraction, promising to respect our parking sovereignty." Miller sighed, a deep, profound exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of his entire 30-year career. He walked over to me, leaving Davis to continue his fruitless interrogation. "Don't tell me," Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "Let me guess. HOA?" "The queen of them all," I confirmed. "We go way back. This is her Sistine Chapel." Miller nodded slowly, staring at Carol, who was now attempting to explain the legal concept of trespass to chattel to a visibly confused Officer Davis, using a submerged Toyota Prius as her primary example. "Look, son," Miller said, turning back to me. "My hands are tied here. We're in a real gray area. It's her property, her equipment. We can't just tackle her and take the remote. That's assault. We can't force her to turn it off without a court order, an injunction. The city attorney would have to file it. A judge would have to sign it. By the time that happens, this whole garage will be an indoor swimming pool, and we'll be filling out reports until Christmas." "So that's it?" I asked, incredulous. "She just wins? We watch the hospital float away because of a legal loophole?" "It's a civil matter," Miller said, and I could tell it pained him to say it. "She's causing a public nuisance, sure. Reckless endangerment, maybe. Destruction of property, definitely. We can cite her for all of it. We can write a report so thick it'll stop a bullet. But we can't physically stop her right this second. The lawyers will have a field day with this for the next 5 years. But right now, we're basically just glorified referees." He looked at the gushing water, then back at me. A glimmer of something, not hope exactly, but maybe morbid curiosity appeared in his weary eyes. "Unless," he said slowly, "you've got a creative solution." And that was it. The spark, the click of the final tumbler falling into place. A beautiful, stupid, gloriously over-the-top idea began to bloom in my mind, fully formed and radiant in its absurdity. The cops couldn't stop the water from coming in, but that didn't mean I couldn't take the water out. My face broke into a so wicked grin. "Officer," I said, my voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "What if the water just disappeared?" Miller's mustache twitched again, more violently this time. It was a full-blown smile. "Son, I am a sworn officer of the law. I cannot and will not endorse any extra-legal activities." However, he paused, looking up at the sky as if contemplating the weather. "I might get very interested in directing traffic on the far side of the street for the next hour or so. And my partner here," he gestured to Davis, who was now being shown the laminated bylaw sheet, "is about to get a very, very long lesson in condo association governance." It was the greenest light I was ever going to get. I pulled out my phone, my thumb already scrolling through my contacts. I had one call to make. There was only one man in the Tri-County area who dealt in the kind of beautiful, high-stakes stupidity I was about to unleash. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Pete's Parts and Peculiar Problems, Scrappy speaking." "Pete, my man, it's Leo." "Leo, my boy," the voice boomed. "What'd you get yourself into now? Did that concrete mixer I sold you finally achieve sentience and run for city council?" "Even better," I said, a wide grin splitting my face as I watched Carol smugly lecture Officer Davis. "I'm fighting an HOA." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. An HOA, the mortal enemy of free men everywhere. Say no more. What do you need? I need a pump, Pete, not a sump pump for your grandma's basement. I'm talking about something you'd use to drain a small lake. Something with guts. Something angry. And I need it, like yesterday. I could practically hear Pete's grin through the phone. Leo, have I ever told you about the Beast? I don't think so. Oh, it's a thing of beauty. A 6-cylinder diesel-powered trash pump. Thing's loud as a 747 on takeoff and drinks fuel like a sailor on shore leave. But it'll suck the chrome off a bumper. Intake hose is 12 inches across. We once used it to drain a swamp for a developer, and it accidentally inhaled a whole family of raccoons. Just slurped them right up. Pete, that's horrible. They were mean raccoons, Leo. Always hissing. Anyway, the point is this thing moves water, a lot of it, fast. Where do you want it? Northwood General Hospital. Main entrance. Can you get it here? I'll have it on the flatbed in 20. Just follow the sound of roaring diesel and the trail of terrified Prius drivers. This is gonna be fun. He hung up. The game was afoot. I walked over to the two hospital maintenance guys, Dave and Gary, who had been watching the whole soap opera with a mixture of horror and fascination. They were both in their late 40s, with the resigned look of men who spent their days fixing things other people broke. "Gentlemen," I said, clapping them on the shoulders, "how would you two like to be part of something truly epic?" Dave, a portly man with a kind face, looked at me. "Does it involve plunging a toilet on the maternity ward?" "I promise you," I said, looking back at the gushing water and the smug, white-clad demon presiding over it. "It's the exact opposite of that." Their eyes lit up. 25 minutes later, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low rumble, a vibration you could feel in the soles of your shoes. It grew into a deafening roar, accompanied by the squeal of air brakes and a thick plume of black smoke that briefly blotted out the sun. Heads turned. The crowd of onlookers, which had swelled considerably, parted like the Red Sea. Pete's flatbed truck, a rust-colored behemoth that looked like it had survived multiple apocalypses, roared onto the scene. And chained to its bed was the star of our show, the Beast. It was magnificent. A monstrous cube of faded yellow steel, the size of a smart car, covered in grease stains and warning labels from the Nixon era. Its diesel engine was exposed, a tangle of pipes and belts that idled with a throaty, intimidating rhythm. Spooled next to it were two hoses that looked less like hoses and more like captured anacondas. Everything about it screamed overkill. It was perfect. Pete, a man who looked exactly like his truck, grizzled, weathered, and powered by pure stubbornness, hopped down from the cab, a greasy rag in his hand and a wild look in his eyes. "She's a thirsty girl, but she'll get the job done," he yelled over the engine's chugging. "Where's the fire, Leo?" "Right there, Pete," I said, pointing to the waterfall. "And there's the arsonist." Pete's eyes landed on Carol, who was staring at the Beast with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. Her smug composure had finally cracked. "What is that monstrosity?" she shrieked, marching towards the truck, her tennis shoes making indignant little squeaks on the pavement. "You can't put that here! This is a violation of noise ordinances, aesthetic standards, environmental—" Pete let out a bark of laughter. "Lady, the only thing this machine violates is the water's will to exist. Now stand back. We got work to do." Carol was incandescent with rage. She planted her feet, trying to physically block the truck. "I am the president of the HOA. I forbid you from unloading this junk." This was Officer Miller's cue to saunter back over from his traffic directing post. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a perfect blend of polite and utterly finished with her nonsense, That truck is on public property, and these gentlemen appear to be engaging in emergency water abatement. I'm going to have to ask you to step back onto your own property, or I'll be forced to cite you for obstruction." Carol sputtered, her face turning a shade of pink that clashed horribly with her polo shirt. Defeated by the very concept of property lines she so cherished, she stomped back to her lawn. But now her phone was out, and she was recording everything, her expression that of a woman documenting war crimes for a future tribunal. "All right, boys, let's dance," I yelled. What followed was a beautiful symphony of chaotic competence. Pete, a master of his craft, unchained the beast and used the truck's hydraulic lift to place it on the pavement with a ground-shaking thud. Dave and Gary, reborn as men of action, grabbed one of the python-like hoses, the intake. It took all three of us to wrestle it down the garage ramp, fighting against the current of the outflowing water. We shoved it deep into the murky pool at the bottom, aiming for what we guessed was the deepest point. The second hose, the outlet, was even bigger. We unspooled it, a giant black canvas tube that snaked across the street. A couple of city utility workers, who had shown up in their truck purely for the entertainment value, saw what we were doing and, with a series of knowing nods, helped us pop a manhole cover 100 feet away and feed the hose down into the storm drain. It was a beautiful moment of interagency cooperation, fueled by a universal dislike of power-tripping HOA presidents. "We're set," Gary yelled, giving me a thumbs up from across the street. "Fuel lines open! Throttles set to mayhem!" Pete shouted, wiping grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. This was it, the moment of truth. I stood before the pump's control panel, a simple, greasy metal plate with a single large ignition button and a throttle lever. The air was thick with tension, the smell of diesel, and the sound of Carol muttering about lawsuits into her phone. I took a deep breath. I looked at my mom, who was watching from the hospital entrance, a look of terrified pride on her face. She gave me a shaky thumbs up. I looked at Officer Miller, who was now leaning against his cruiser, arms crossed, the picture of nonchalance. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I looked at Carol, her face a mask of rage, her phone held high. I gave her a little wink. And then I slammed the ignition button. For a second, nothing happened. Then the beast sputtered. It coughed out a puff of black smoke. It shuddered, as if shaking off a long slumber. And then the 6-cylinder diesel engine roared to life. The noise was apocalyptic. It wasn't just loud, it was a physical force, a wall of sound that vibrated in your teeth and rattled your bones. Car alarms, not yet destroyed by the water, began to shriek in protest. The crowd of onlookers instinctively took a step back, covering their ears. The giant intake hose, which had been lying limp in the water, suddenly stiffened and jumped like a live thing. The surface of the garage lake, which had been relatively placid, began to churn. A whirlpool, a legitimate, honest-to-God whirlpool, formed around the mouth of the hose, sucking in the floating coffee cup and the lonely crock. And the water level began to drop. It wasn't a gentle draining. It wasn't a slow seeping away. It was a violent, slurping, world-ending vortex of evacuation. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. 30 seconds. The roofs of the smaller cars, the Hondas, the Toyotas, the Priuses, were fully exposed, water streaming off them in sheets. 1 minute, the water was down to the door handles. You could see the full extent of the automotive carnage. The water level was dropping a visible foot every few seconds. 1 minute, 30 seconds. The tires were visible. The floor of the garage was reappearing, first as a slick, dark surface, then as merely damp concrete. The whirlpool was now a furious, gurgling drain, sucking up the last of the standing water with a deafening, slurping sound. 2 minutes, silence. Well, not silence. The beast was still roaring its triumphant song of victory, but the sound of gushing, cascading water was gone. The flood was over. The entire P1 level of the Northwood General Hospital parking garage had gone from being a 3-foot-deep lake to being, at worst, slightly puddle-strewn in less time than it takes to properly toast a bagel. All eyes turned to Carol. Her jaw was slack. Her phone had dropped to her side. Her face, which had cycled through smugness and rage, was now a perfect, blank canvas of disbelief. The weapon she had wielded with such righteous fury, the flood that was her ultimate expression of power, had been undone. Not by lawyers, not by police, not by negotiation, but by brute mechanical force, in 120 seconds. She stared at the damp, empty garage, then at the still roaring beast, then at me. Her brain seemed to short-circuit, unable to process the sheer, stunning totality of her defeat. And then she screamed, a raw, primal shriek of thwarted power that cut through the engine's roar. "You can't do that," she wailed, her voice cracking, and then she uttered the 5 words that would seal her fate and make her an internet legend forever. 5 words of such profound, spectacular absurdity that they deserved to be embroidered on a pillow. "That's my water!" A beat of stunned silence fell over the crowd. Even the beast seemed to quiet down for a moment in respect for the sheer insanity of the statement. Her water, as if she had some possessory claim to the thousands of gallons she had just used to commit mass vehicular assault. Then, a single person started to laugh. It was Officer Miller. It began as a low chuckle, then grew into a full-bodied, gut-busting guffaw that made his mustache bounce. His laughter was infectious. Soon, the maintenance guys were howling. The nurses were doubled over. The crowd of onlookers erupted. The sound of collective, cathartic laughter rolled across the parking lot, a wave of ridicule that washed over Carol and her shattered ego. This was a defeat more total than any lawsuit could ever provide. Just as the laughter reached its peak, a white van with a local news station logo screeched to a halt nearby. A reporter, a young woman with impossibly perfect hair and a microphone already in hand, leaped out, followed by a cameraman who swung his rig onto his shoulder with practiced ease. They had clearly been monitoring the police scanner and had arrived just in time for the grand finale. Ma'am, Tiffany Chang, Channel 8 News. Can you tell us what happened here?" the reporter said, shoving the microphone into Carol's face. Carol, wild-eyed and broken, stared at the camera as if it were the eye of a basilisk. He stole my water," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "It was my deterrent, my property." The cameraman, bless his professional instincts, zoomed in on her face, then panned over to the roaring beast, then to the damp but conspicuously empty garage, then to me, standing there with a light coating of grease and an expression of grim satisfaction. The story told itself. "Sir," Tiffany Chang pivoted, now jogging towards me. "Can you tell us your side? Who are you?" I held up a hand. Pete, seeing his cue, mercifully throttled down the beast, and the world returned to a manageable decibel level. "Name's Leo," I said into the microphone, trying to sound cool and not like my heart was still hammering from the adrenaline. "I'm just a guy who likes dry parking garages. There was a problem, we found a solution." "An incredible solution," Tiffany said, her eyes wide. "Witnesses say you drained this entire garage in minutes." 2 minutes, give or take," I said with a shrug. "It's a good pump." Behind me, I could hear Carol descending into a full-blown rant, shrieking about bylaws and property values and water theft to the unblinking camera lens. It was a glorious, career-ending meltdown, and Tiffany Chang knew she had television gold. Carol finally gave up, letting out one last frustrated shriek before turning and storming back to her condo, the walk of shame to end all walks of shame. My mom finally broke through the crowd and threw her arms around me. "Leo, you did it! You beautiful, crazy genius, you did it!" "Just doing my part to fight for the common man, Ma," I said, hugging her back. The hospital administrator, a perpetually stressed-looking man named Mr. Harrison, whom I'd seen in pictures, bustled over, his face a mask of pure relief on. "Son, I don't know what to say," he stammered, grabbing my hand and shaking it vigorously. "You just saved this hospital millions, in damages, in lawsuits, in logistical nightmares. The board is going to love you. Anything you need, anything, name it." I grinned, feeling the exhaustion and the giddy thrill of victory all at once. "Well," I said, "I could use a lifetime supply of free cafeteria Jell-O. The green kind. And maybe you could talk to the city about my creative water diversion permit. I'm not sure Pete filed one." Officer Miller, who had finally contained his laughter, clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't you worry about a permit, son," he said with a conspiratorial wink. "We'll just log this as community-assisted emergency water abatement. The paperwork will be a thing of beauty. As for her," he jerked a thumb in the direction Carol had fled, "she's about to be on the receiving end of about 50 civil lawsuits from all those car owners. Not to mention a hefty fine from the city for tampering with a storm drain and improper use of a commercial irrigation system. She's cooked." The story, as they say, went viral. Tiffany Chang's report led the 6 o'clock news. The clip of Carol, her face contorted in rage, screaming, "That's my water!" became an instant internet meme. There were remixes, there were t-shirts. My face was plastered all over local blogs under headlines like "The HOA Slayer" and "Local Man Defeats Karen with Industrial Might." I did a few awkward phone interviews with national news outlets, always trying to downplay the absurdity of it all, but it was no use. The world loves a good David versus Goliath story, especially when Goliath is an unhinged HOA president and David has a 6-cylinder diesel pump. The fallout for Carol was swift and brutal. The Evergreen Vistas Condo Association, facing a barrage of legal threats from the hospital and a mutiny from its own residents, many of whom secretly sent me thank you emails, held an emergency meeting. Using the viral video as Exhibit A, they voted unanimously to remove her as president. Buried under legal fees and public humiliation, she sold her condo at a significant loss and moved to an undisclosed location, presumably somewhere with no neighbors and very poor water pressure. 6 months later, I was standing in a manicured suburban backyard, staring at a life-sized fiberglass replica of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It was wearing a sombrero. "So, let me get this straight," I said to my client, a nervous-looking man in his 60s. "Your neighbor, Mr. Henderson, installed this after you complained about his prize-winning gnome collection? He said it was an artistic expression of prehistoric joy," the man whimpered. "The HOA says it violates the maximum height ordinance for lawn ornaments." "I see," I said, circling the dinosaur. "And they've hired me to make it go away." My business, Leo's Logistics and Creative Solutions, was booming. After the Northwood drainage incident, as it came to be known, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. I was the go-to guy for problems that were too weird for lawyers and too delicate for a wrecking ball. I'd even hired Dave and Gary, the hospital maintenance guys, who had quit their jobs for a life of adventure. They were currently figuring out the T-Rex's structural weak points. Life was good, and weirder than I could have ever imagined. Back at Northwood General, things had settled into a new, more peaceful normal. The hospital and the condo association, under a new, sane president, a retired librarian who mostly just wanted people to be quiet, had drafted a sensible shared parking agreement. The lawsuits against Carol were proceeding apace, and the hospital had even installed a small, tasteful brass plaque on the wall next to the garage entrance. It read, "In commemoration of the day, common sense and a very large pump prevailed. The Leo Memorial Drainage Event." I had protested the name, but Mr. Harrison insisted. He also made good on his promise of free Jell-O, a fact my fridge could attest to. That afternoon, I was back at the hospital, visiting my mom for lunch. As I was walking back to my truck, I saw a young couple in the garage, staring helplessly at a flat tire on their minivan. The dad was kicking it lightly, the universal sign for, "I have no idea what I'm doing." The mom was trying to distract two toddlers in the back seat, who were on the verge of a meltdown. I sighed, then smiled. Some problems were big and loud and involved diesel engines. Others were small and quiet, but they all needed solving. I walked over. "Need a hand?" I asked. The dad looked at me, his face a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "Yeah," he said. "I would love one." "No problem," I said, crouching down to look at the jack. I glanced up at the brass plaque gleaming under the fluorescent lights, then back at the family. "I'm pretty good with problems around here." I got to work. The simple, satisfying task of loosening lug nuts and aligning a spare feeling like a form of meditation. Waffles, my faithful bulldog, who was waiting patiently for me in the passenger seat of my truck, let out a soft, happy woof, as if in approval. The world was full of chaos, of petty tyrants and bizarre fiberglass dinosaurs. But for every problem, there was a solution. You just had to be willing to get your hands dirty, or, when necessary, find a much, much bigger pump.